In this video, we will talk about how to interpret qualitative data, and especially then how to use theory in a qualitative data analysis. And there are different ways, different roles that theory can play in a qualitative research project. It's common to distinguish between inductive, deductive, and abductive approaches to qualitative data analysis. In an inductive approach, you start from the empirical data. So you collect data, you analyze the data without having read a lot of literature and theory, and you seek to find patterns that can be developed into a theory, or to kind of build a theory from the data up. This kind of inductive approach is especially common in an approach to qualitative data analysis called grounded theory. And the opposite approach would be a deductive approach. In a deductive approach, you start from the theory and then you move on to the empirical data. And a deductive approach is often more common in quantitative research, where the theory might give you the grounds for developing a hypothesis, and then you test this hypothesis using the empirical data, either confirming the hypothesis or finding out that the reality wasn't the way that this hypothesis anticipated. A lot of qualitative research is, however, abductive in nature, and that means that you move back and forth between theory and empirical data. That before you collect the data and start analyzing it, you have already read some literature, you have some concepts and theories that you think might be relevant, but you're also open for what is there in the empirical data. So you use the theory to interpret the data, but then you also use the data in order to develop the theory, to find new categories, to find new concepts, to develop the ideas in the literature that you've been reading. And an important aspect when it comes to interpreting qualitative data is that what kind of concepts you use, what kind of theories you draw on, and which authors you use when it comes to how you understand particular concepts or what kind of theories you use will have a huge impact on your analysis, and because of that, on your findings or conclusions or arguments, whatever you call them. Because the same data can be used to make different arguments depending on your research question and depending on the concepts and theories that you draw on. So it's not, doing research is not like being a miner. It's not about digging deep into a mountain, deep into the data in order to find the kind of gold or silver or copper or whatever is there. And if you only dig deep enough, you'll find it. And that there's only one thing you can find. You can find gold if gold is there, but you cannot find something else. Instead, doing research is more like being an author, making a story based on your data. That you develop a research question, you find some concepts and theories that seem useful, that can help you to see and understand the phenomenon that you are interested in. So that, in a way, the word finding it confuses more than it clarifies, because findings are not something you find, it's something you construct. So talking then about arguments is probably more appropriate, because arguments is something you develop. And I like to think of theory using the metaphor of a kaleidoscope. I'm sure you might be familiar with this kind of toy where you have different cylinders and you can move them, and depending on how you move them, the reality that you see through this kaleidoscope will look slightly different. And there's a nice quote that likens theory to a kaleidoscope, where the author says that theory is like a kaleidoscope, the child's toy consisting of a tube, a number of lenses, and fragments of translucent colored glass or plastic. When you turn the tube and look down the lens of the kaleidoscope, The shapes and colors visible at the bottom change. As the tube is turned, different lenses come into play and the combinations of color and shape shift from one pattern to another. In a similar way, we can see social theory, or theory in general, as a sort of kaleidoscope. By shifting theoretical perspective, by using other concepts, other theories, and other authors' understanding of this particular concept, the world under investigation combine and recombine into new patterns, as they are viewed through different theoretical perspectives. Different theories bring different aspects of the world into view. Theories are like the lenses of the kaleidoscope. When you slot different ones into place, things you could not see before suddenly become visible. Patterns that were indistinct become sharper. So theory, what kind of theories and concepts you choose to use will shape your analysis. And that can feel liberating because it means that you're not stuck with one particular theory, you don't have to use this or that theory. At the same time, it can feel very overwhelming because you might not know at all what kind of theories you want to use and what kind of theories could be relevant. And of course, it doesn't mean that any theory would be relevant. And how do you then draw the limit between which theories could be relevant, which theories are not relevant at all? And this is something that's hard to explain in very simple ways. It's something that's best learned through practice. Read empirical journal articles. Look at what kind of theories they use and read articles on the same topic, investigating, having similar research questions, investigating the same topic. Look at how they draw on different kinds of concepts, different theories, and how that shapes the analysis and the arguments that the author develops. Or you can do the same reading a master thesis. Look at how the student uses theory in order to make this relationship between theory and analysis and arguments more concrete. Because this is something that even PhD students and even researchers struggle with, finding the good theories and the good concepts that help you to see something in the data that you're analyzing. I would like to use one example to illustrate how changing the research question and the theoretical perspectives can change the whole analysis in a research project. And this example is taken from my own PhD research a couple of years back, where I analyzed, in one of the articles for the PhD, I analyzed social media posts written by a Chinese charity organization called Love Save Pneumoconiosis. This is a charity organization that works to help workers who have contracted a lung disease called pneumoconiosis because they've been working in dusty environments without the necessary equipment to protect them against the dust and the factories where they were working. I came across this organization as I was looking at a social media platform called Weibo, which is similar to Twitter in China. And I thought it was interesting how this organization used this social media platform and how they communicated through this platform, because they were very active. They included a lot of short videos with workers who had contracted this disease, sharing their stories, calling on people following their account to donate money or help out in other ways. So I wanted to use this data to analyze this organization. And I decided to collect a set of Weibo posts from 2011 and 2012 from some selected months, because it would be too much to analyze all posts from both these years. So that was my data. I had 5 randomly selected months from these 2 years, 2011 and 2012. And then as my analysis changed, the data remained the same, but my research question and theoretical perspectives changed, and thereby changing the analysis. In the original analysis, I asked the question, what kind of strategies does this organization use to mobilize Chinese netizens or internet users to engage in the organization's campaign to save these workers with pneumoconiosis? So I was interested in the relationship between organizations and the internet users following the organization, and how the organization tried to mobilize these followers. And I then used theory on social movements, where there's a concept called framing that's often used to analyze how organizations mobilize their followers. And I used theory on representations of suffering, because I was interested in how this organization portrayed the suffering of the workers and how that influenced the way that internet users became engaged in the work of the organization. And then, for a lot of different reasons that I will not go into detail on in this video, I decided to change gradually my focus in this analysis and changed the research question, and then I also had to change the theoretical perspectives, because the ones I had originally didn't fit with the new focus of the analysis. So in the final analysis, my focus was more on the political role of these Weibo posts about workers with pneumoconiosis, not so much about the relationship between the organization and its followers, but more about the role of this organization in the larger internet public sphere in China. So I looked into previous research on how the internet is used politically in China by different actors, and I drew on theory on the role of language in resistance, and how resistance is expressed in more repressive context. Sorry. To be able to say something about how this organization used Weibo or Twitter to express social criticism in China, which is a non-democratic context where there's not the same freedom of expression as we know from Norway, for instance. So the way this organization wrote about these workers with pneumoconiosis became a way for them to subtly criticize the path of development that China has been taking. So my analysis, my findings or arguments, as I would say, were totally different in this final analysis, because I changed the theoretical perspectives, I changed the research question, but the data remained the same. Lastly, I want to say something about how to structure the analysis in the master thesis, because this is something students often struggle with. And this is also related to a distinction, which is also a bit problematic, between findings and discussion, where findings is understood as a more descriptive presentation of the data, whereas discussion is then the interpretation of the data where you draw on the theoretical perspectives. And some students choose to first, in a separate chapter, present the findings or a more descriptive presentation of the data, and then in a second chapter do a discussion where they link in the theoretical perspectives and concepts and literature that they've been using. And this is a kind of structure that's, I would say, inspired by a lot of quantitative research, where it's common to have what is called an IMRED structure, where you first have an introduction, then you have a method section, then you have the results or the findings, and then you do a discussion. Some people would argue that this is a structure that's more appropriate in quantitative research. If this structure works for you, perfectly fine. Some students, however, find that it's hard to distinguish between findings and discussions, that these two are so closely connected that the text becomes very repetitive if you try to distinguish. Then a more thematic structure, where you first deal with topic 1, present findings and discuss in a parallel way, then you go on to topic 2, do the same, topic 3, etc., is a structure that works better. Both these structures are okay. Use the one that fits your thesis best and get advice from your supervisor if you're unsure.